Hello, kids. I'm Kai.
Hello, fellow children. I'm Roger.
And today, we're doing the Joseph story.
And the main theological theme is that God has absolute sovereignty.
This means that God is in control of everything that happens, even when it seems like the situation is going bad. It's in his hands.
Throughout his life, Joseph has been betrayed by his brothers, sold into slavery. He was also falsely accused, in prison, but through all that, God was working behind the scenes, and eventually he rose to power.
We'll now go through the very important moments in Joseph's life that demonstrates God's providence throughout the story.
First story we'll be talking about today is Joseph's coat of many colors. So Joseph was the son of Jacob, who was his favorite son out of all of his other brothers. And then he gave him a coat of many colors to represent his favoritism. So that creates jealousy. It's Joseph's coat of many colors. As you can see, it's very colorful and very rainbowy.
The result of this jealousy from his brothers had Joseph having a lot of dreams.
So Joseph had a dream that the sun, moon, and 11 stars all bowed down to him. And his brothers got even more jealous because the 11 stars represented Joseph's brothers.
So Joseph again had another one of these dreams, and because he's a very sleepy man, very sleepy boy, he imagined in his dream that his brothers were bundles of grain, and they all bowed down to him, like to his knees, groveled at his knees, bowing to him. That was in his dream. Joseph's very jealous and envious brothers were contemplating on whether or not they should just fully kill him and murder him in cold blood, or deciding to sell him to traders going into Egypt.
So after Joseph was sold into slavery, the brothers took Joseph's coat of many colors, dipped it in goat's blood, and handed it to their father. The father deeply mourned that his favorite son was dead. This was a successful scheme from Joseph's brothers, even though that Joseph was alive.
Joseph was sold into Potiphar's home. He's a high-ranking official, and he's doing pretty well for himself, and he worked in his home. He was tempted by Potiphar's wife, a thirst trap, tempted Joseph, saying, to do the nasty. You don't have to elaborate on the nasty because we're kid-friendly around here. But he said, no, I refuse to, because Joseph's an upstanding human being and is for God and will always be for God.
One night, Joseph was just hanging out in his prison cell when two prisoners came in, the chief cupbearer and the chief chef. They both have dreams and are really startled, and Joseph asks, oh, what's troubling you? Right? And then they tell them their dreams. So Joseph told them that the interpretations belong to God, but he will interpret them from the power of God.
So when Joseph was talking to the cupbearer tells him about his dream. He elaborates on it, and Joseph listens to it, and he says in his dream he saw a vine with 3 branches, and he said there's fruit on it. I'll give you 3 seconds. No, let me up it to 5 seconds. Can you guess what fruit was on these branches? It was grapes. It was grapes. And he basically, throughout the rest of the dream, he squeezes the grape juice, puts it in Pharaoh's cup. That was his dream. There's actually more to this dream, if you really think about it. The 3 branches represent 3 days. These 3 days represent that in 3 days' time, he'll have his position restored as his servant for Pharaoh. So in case you missed that.
So, the baker said in his dream that he had 3 bread baskets piled on his head. And David said that also represented 3 days. But when 3 days came, the baker was executed. He was basically eaten alive by crows.
You fell for the pump fake. He didn't get devoured by crows. He actually got impaled. Like, just imagine. Actually, it's gonna be kind of gruesome for children to imagine it. But like imagine, like your arm, right? Imagine something going completely through it and sticking out. He got impaled. It's pretty disgusting.
It wasn't his arm.
And no, I'm giving an example. Of like,
Oh,
what
I
getting
see. Yeah, I
impaled
see.
means.
And then he was eaten by crows. Asked the cupbearer to remember to mention him to Pharaoh, but sadly, he did not and remained in prison for a longer period of time.
So Pharaoh's been having dreams lately.
Dreams, and none of his advisors can really tell him what was wrong with them or couldn't interpret them because, respectfully, God wasn't with them and didn't give him the ability that Joseph has to, interpret dreams. So who does this call for? Joseph to go help the one and only Pharaoh.
In Pharaoh's dreams, he had 7 healthy fat cows being eaten by 7 thin cows. In other dreams, he would have 7 full grains of wheat being eaten by 7 thin grains of wheat. The cupbearer remembers Joseph and tells Pharaoh about him, that he can interpret dreams. So Pharaoh summons Joseph from prison.
Basically, he describes saying there'll be 7 years of abundance or plenty great. Basically, there'll be a bunch of good produce and food, plenty of it. And then there'll be 7 years of famine. And basically, 7 years of famine, there'll not be enough of anything. No food, bad produce, or whatever. It's like, it's gonna be so severe, so awful, that they're gonna forget about the 7 years of good. It's like, what was all this for if we're in such a bad time?
Joseph suggests a plan to save some produce from the 7 years of plenty for the 7 years of famine. So Pharaoh was so pleased with this idea that he put Joseph in charge of this great plan, and he also made him second in command. So all of this suffering of Joseph, of him getting betrayed and thrown in jail and framed, eventually led him up to being successful. It was God's plan. From being the favorite son, to thrown down a pit, sold into slavery, getting framed by Potiphar's wife, finally ended up in power, and it was all part of God's plan. So Joseph's plan was successful. Joseph had enough food to feed Egypt and also have other nations come to him for food.
The famine, right? The really bad one. It got so severe, like that Joseph's own brothers came to Pharaoh like, "Yo, bro, I need some grub. We need food desperately." And Joseph treats them really well, even though they did him badly. He treats them very well with love and kindness, regardless of what they did in the past, because, he has God by his side. So, the moral of the story is, if you weren't paying attention, it's basically, even when life has dealt you an unfair hand, God can do it for good. And even when you are up and you have the opportunity to, bash those that did you wrong in the past, you shouldn't. You should still forgive them out of the goodness of your own heart, because that's what God calls us to do. Calls all of us to do. And that's about it.
Well, kiddos, I hope you learned something today. Trust in God, no matter what kind of circumstance you're in.